Sarah Chin stepped off the bus at Fort Bragg with trembling hands clutched around her duffel bag. The North Carolina heat hit her like a wall, but nothing compared to the intimidating presence of Drill Sergeant Martinez, who stood waiting with arms crossed and a scowl that could melt steel. At 22, Sarah had been the star of her college ROTC program, graduating summa cum laude with a degree in mechanical engineering. Her professors praised her analytical mind and leadership potential. Her parents beamed with pride when she received her commission as a second lieutenant. But none of that mattered now as she stood among 30 other fresh-faced officers beginning the grueling officer basic course. "Welcome to hell, lieutenants." Sergeant Martinez's voice boomed across the formation. "For the next 14 weeks, you will be pushed beyond every limit you think you have. Some of you will break. Some of you will quit. And some of you might actually become the leaders our soldiers deserve." Sarah's confidence wavered as she looked around at her fellow officers. Most were bigger, stronger, and seemed more naturally suited for military life. There was Jackson, a former college football player whose biceps strained against his uniform. Rodriguez had already served 4 years as an enlisted soldier before earning his commission. Thompson came from a military family where his father and grandfather had both been decorated officers. The first challenge came within hours. The infamous obstacle course stretched before them like a medieval torture device designed by sadistic engineers. Rope climbs, wall scaling, barbed wire crawls, and a series of seemingly impossible physical challenges that would test every muscle in their bodies. Sarah watched as Jackson effortlessly hauled himself over the 12-foot wall. Rodriguez moved through the course with practiced efficiency, his prior military experience evident in every fluid movement. When her turn came, Sarah's arms shook as she attempted the rope climb. Halfway up, her grip failed, and she crashed to the ground in a heap of embarrassment. "Chun, what are you doing down there, taking a nap?" Sergeant Martinez appeared beside her like a storm cloud. "This isn't your college library, Lieutenant. Get up and try again." Her second attempt ended the same way. By her third try, several other officers had already completed the entire course while she struggled with just the first obstacle. Sweat poured down her face, mixing with dirt and frustration. Her hands were raw and bleeding, but she refused to give up. "I can do this," she whispered to herself, gripping the rope again. This time, she focused on technique rather than brute force, using her legs to support her weight as she slowly inched upward. It took twice as long as anyone else, but she finally rang the bell at the top. The victory felt hollow when she realized she still had 20 more obstacles to complete. Each challenge seemed designed to exploit her physical weaknesses. The wall climb left her arms trembling with exhaustion. The barbed wire crawl shredded her uniform and scraped her back raw. By the time she reached the final sprint, most of her classmates were already showered and heading to dinner. That night in the barracks, Sarah sat on her narrow bunk writing in her journal while her roommate Lisa chatted with other officers about their backgrounds. Lisa had been a track star at West Point, and the physical challenges seemed like child's play to her. "Don't take it personally," Lisa said later as they prepared for lights out. "Everyone struggles with something different here. You'll find your strength." But Sarah wasn't so sure. The next morning brought land navigation training, where they had to find specific points in the dense forest using only a map and compass. While she excelled at reading the technical aspects of the map, translating that knowledge into real-world navigation proved challenging. She spent 4 hours wandering in circles, arriving at the final checkpoint long after dark while search teams were preparing to look for her. The academic portions of training should have been her salvation. Sarah had always been brilliant in classroom settings, absorbing complex information and solving problems that stumped her peers. But military academics proved different from anything she had experienced in college. The material came fast and furious: weapons systems, tactical procedures, leadership principles, and military law all compressed into intensive sessions that left little time for her usual methodical study approach. During her first tactical exercise, Sarah was assigned as the platoon leader for a simulated night raid. She had studied the mission parameters extensively, creating detailed plans with multiple contingencies. But when the exercise began, everything fell apart immediately. Her radio communications were unclear, her squad leaders couldn't understand her orders, and The entire operation devolved into confusion. Chun, what kind of leadership was that? Captain Williams, their company commander, pulled her aside after the failed exercise. Your soldiers didn't know where to go or what to do. A leader's first job is clear communication. I had a detailed plan, sir, Sarah protested. I studied every possible scenario. Planning is important, but adaptability is crucial. You can't lead from behind a clipboard, Lieutenant. Your soldiers need to see confidence and decisiveness, even when things go wrong. The feedback stung because Sarah knew it was accurate. She had been so focused on having the perfect plan that she forgot about the human element of leadership. When the plan inevitably changed, she had no idea how to adjust and guide her team through the chaos. Week after week, the challenges intensified. Physical training sessions left her exhausted while others seemed to thrive. Field exercises exposed her lack of practical experience compared to prior enlisted officers. Even simple tasks like cleaning weapons took her twice as long as her peers, who seemed to disassemble and reassemble their rifles with mechanical precision. The breaking point came during the 4th week. After another failed leadership exercise where her squad got lost during a night movement, Sarah found herself sitting alone in the latrine at 2 in the morning, quietly crying from exhaustion and frustration. Every muscle in her body ached. Her hands were covered in cuts and blisters, and she felt like a complete failure as a leader. Maybe I'm not cut out for this, she whispered to herself, the words feeling like a betrayal of everything she had worked toward. The doubt that had been growing for weeks finally found its voice, and Sarah began seriously considering whether she should request to withdraw from the program. The next morning would bring another day of challenges, another opportunity to fail in front of her peers and instructors. As she finally made her way back to her bunk, Sarah wondered if she had the strength to face it, or if it was time to admit defeat and find a different path for her life. The barracks fell silent around her as she lay awake, staring at the ceiling and questioning every decision that had brought her to this point. Tomorrow would test not just her physical and mental capabilities, but her fundamental determination to become the leader she had always dreamed of being. The alarm blared at 0500 hours, jolting Sarah from restless sleep. Her body protested every movement as she rolled out of her narrow bunk, muscles stiff and sore from weeks of punishment. Around her, other officers groaned and shuffled toward the bathroom. But the familiar routine continued regardless of their physical state. During morning formation, Sergeant Martinez announced the day's challenge would be different. Instead of the usual physical training, they would be participating in a crisis leadership simulation. Sarah's stomach dropped. These exercises had become her nemesis, scenarios where quick thinking and decisive action mattered more than careful planning. Today, you'll be dealing with a hostage situation, Captain Williams explained as they gathered in the simulation center. Each of you will take turns as the incident commander. Your decisions will determine whether civilians live or die. There is no time for extensive planning. Leadership under pressure is what separates real officers from those wearing pretty uniforms. Sarah watched as Jackson took the first scenario. Even though he struggled with the tactical details, his natural confidence shone through. He made quick decisions, communicated clearly with his team, and projected the kind of calm authority that made others want to follow him. When Rodriguez took his turn, his prior experience as an enlisted soldier gave him practical insights that impressed the evaluators. When Sarah's name was called, her heart pounded as she stepped into the simulation room. The scenario unfolded on multiple screens around her. Armed suspects holding 3 civilians in a warehouse, police perimeter established, and a ticking clock counting down to an unknown deadline. Multiple radio channels crackled with information from different units, creating a chaos of overlapping voices and conflicting reports. Lieutenant Chun, you're the incident commander, the instructor announced. What are your orders? Sarah's mind raced through everything she had studied about hostage situations. She knew the textbook procedures, the various tactical options, and the legal considerations. But translating that knowledge into immediate action felt overwhelming with everyone watching and the clock counting down precious seconds. I need to establish communication with the suspects, she began, her voice barely above a whisper. Speak up, Lieutenant. Sergeant Martinez barked from the observation area. Your team can't hear you. And Neither can anyone else. Sarah cleared her throat and repeated her order louder, but her uncertainty was obvious to everyone in the room. As the scenario continued, she requested multiple briefings, asked for additional intelligence reports, and seemed paralyzed by the need to gather more information before acting. "Lieutenant, you've been requesting briefings for 12 minutes, Captain Williams interrupted. The suspects just executed one hostage because they felt ignored. Sometimes perfect information isn't available, and leaders must act on what they know. The simulation ended with Sarah having made minimal progress toward resolving the crisis. She had followed procedures correctly, but her hesitation and lack of decisive action would have cost lives in a real situation. As she left the simulation room, she could feel the disappointed looks from her fellow officers and instructors. During the debrief session, the feedback was brutal but necessary. "Lieutenant Chun, you have excellent analytical skills and thorough knowledge of procedures," Captain Williams began. "But leadership isn't about knowing everything perfectly. It's about making the best decisions possible with available information and inspiring confidence in your team. Your soldiers need to believe you know what you're doing, even when you're unsure." That afternoon brought weapons training, another area where Sarah struggled to keep pace. While dismantling and cleaning her rifle, she watched Lisa complete the task in half the time with practiced efficiency. Jackson and Rodriguez moved through weapons handling exercises with natural fluidity, their movements precise and confident. Sarah's hands shook slightly as she attempted to reassemble her weapon under time pressure. A small spring flew across the table, and she spent precious minutes searching for it while the clock ticked down. When time was called, her rifle was only partially assembled while most others had completed the task successfully. "Chun, stay after class," Sergeant Martinez commanded as the other officers filed out for evening chow. Sarah's heart sank as she approached the drill sergeant's desk. She expected another lecture about her performance, another reminder of how she was falling behind her peers. Instead, Sergeant Martinez studied her with an expression she couldn't quite read. "Lieutenant, do you want to be here?" he asked directly. The question caught Sarah off guard. "Yes, Sergeant. Of course I do." "Then, stop acting like a victim and start acting like a leader. Every day I watch you beat yourself up for not being perfect at everything immediately. You think leadership means having all the answers, but that's not what your soldiers need from you." Sergeant Martinez stood and walked to the window overlooking the training grounds. "I've been training officers for 15 years, Chun. I've seen naturally gifted athletes who couldn't inspire a squad to follow them to the bathroom. I've seen brilliant tacticians who froze when their perfect plans fell apart. And I've seen average people become exceptional leaders because they never gave up on themselves or their soldiers." He turned back to face her. "You have something many of these hotshots don't have. You care about getting it right. You study harder than anyone else. You're not here for glory or family tradition. You genuinely want to serve and lead well. That matters more than being able to do 50 push-ups or disassemble a weapon blindfolded." Sarah felt tears threatening to form but fought them back. "But I keep failing, Sergeant. I can't keep up physically. I freeze up during exercises, and everyone can see I don't belong here." "Bullshit, Lieutenant. You're comparing your beginning to everyone else's middle. Jackson was a college athlete for 4 years. Rodriguez has prior military experience. You're starting from scratch, but you're not giving yourself credit for how far you've already come. For weeks ago, you couldn't complete the obstacle course. Yesterday, you finished it in the allotted time. That's not failure. That's progress." The conversation continued for another 20 minutes, with Sergeant Martinez sharing stories of other officers who had struggled initially, but went on to become exceptional leaders. He explained that the training was designed to break down artificial confidence and rebuild it based on genuine competence and character. "Leadership isn't about being the strongest or fastest or smartest person in the room," he concluded. "It's about bringing out the best in others and accomplishing the mission regardless of circumstances. You have that potential, Chun, but you need to start believing in yourself." That evening, instead of studying alone as usual, Sarah joined a group of her fellow officers who were practicing weapons disassembly in the common area. Lisa immediately offered to help her with techniques for faster reassembly. Jackson shared tips for improving her grip strength that had helped him with the rope climb. Even Rodriguez, who seemed naturally gifted at everything, admitted he had struggled with land navigation during his enlisted training. Everyone has different strengths, Thompson said as they worked together. The key is supporting each other through the weaknesses and learning from each other's successes. We're all going to be officers together. We might as well help each other get there. For the first time in weeks, Sarah felt like part of the team rather than the weak link holding everyone back. As they practiced together, she realized that her fellow officers weren't judging her as harshly as she had been judging herself. They respected her determination and wanted to see her succeed. The next morning's physical training session included partner exercises where officers worked together to complete obstacles. Sarah was paired with Lisa, whose athletic ability complemented Sarah's analytical approach to problem solving. Together, they developed strategies for tackling challenges that neither could have completed alone. During the day's tactical exercise, Sarah volunteered to serve as the communications officer rather than seeking a leadership role. This position allowed her to use her organizational skills and attention to detail while gaining confidence in military operations without the pressure of command responsibility. She coordinated information flow between multiple units flawlessly, earning praise from the evaluators. "See, Chen, you're finding your niche," Sergeant Martinez commented during the after-action review. Not every leader needs to be the person charging up the hill. Sometimes the most important leadership happens behind the scenes, making sure everyone else has what they need to succeed. As the second month of training began, Sarah felt a subtle shift in her confidence. She still struggled with many physical challenges, but her improvement was steady and noticeable. More importantly, she was beginning to understand that leadership came in many forms, and her unique strengths could be just as valuable as natural athletic ability or prior military experience. The real test would come in the following weeks when training intensified and the pressure increased. But for the first time since arriving at Fort Bragg, Sarah believed she belonged there and had something valuable to contribute to the team. The 6th week of training arrived with an announcement that made every officer in the barracks go silent. Captain Williams stood before them with a grim expression that immediately told them this would be different from their previous challenges. "Next week begins your field training exercise," he announced. 72 hours in the field with minimal sleep, limited food, and constant pressure. You will be evaluated on everything: leadership, tactics, physical endurance, and mental resilience. This is where we separate those who can truly lead under extreme stress from those who merely look good in a classroom. Sarah's stomach churned as she listened to the details. They would be divided into small teams and given various missions ranging from reconnaissance to combat simulations. Each officer would rotate through leadership positions while being observed by cadre, who would document every decision, every moment of hesitation, and every instance of failure. The preparation week became a blur of intensive study sessions and physical conditioning. Sarah threw herself into learning everything she could about small unit tactics, radio procedures, and map reading. Her analytical nature served her well as she memorized grid coordinates, studied terrain features, and practiced calling for artillery support on paper exercises. But she also focused on areas where she had previously struggled. During evening hours, she practiced weapon drills until her movements became more fluid. She worked with Lisa and Thompson on improving her physical fitness, gradually building the endurance she would need for 3 days of continuous operations. The night before the field exercise, Sarah sat in her bunk writing letters home. She wanted to tell her parents about her struggles and fears, but instead found herself writing about the unexpected friendships she had formed and the gradual growth in her confidence. The scared girl who had arrived at Fort Bragg 6 weeks ago felt like a different person, though she knew the real test was yet to come. At 0400 hours on Monday morning, buses loaded with tired officers departed for the remote training area. Sarah stared out the window at the dense forest that would be their home for the next 3 days. The facility had no running water, no electricity, and no comfort of any kind. Everything they needed would have to be carried on their backs or acquired through tactical exercises. The first mission came within hours of arriving. Sarah's 8-person team was tasked with conducting a reconnaissance of an enemy position and reporting back with detailed intelligence. Jackson was assigned as the initial team leader, a choice that seemed logical given his natural confidence and physical presence. However, the mission quickly revealed that natural leadership ability meant little without proper planning and attention to detail. Jackson led the team directly toward the target without considering routes, security, or contingency plans. When they encountered unexpected obstacles, he made impulsive decisions that put the entire team at risk of discovery. Sarah watched the operation unfold with growing concern. Her analytical mind immediately identified several problems with Jackson's approach, but she hesitated to speak up. She was still the weak link in the team's physical capabilities, and questioning the leadership of someone more naturally gifted felt presumptuous. The breaking point came when Jackson decided to move the team across an open field in broad daylight, because it was the fastest route to their objective. Sarah could see enemy observers positioned on high ground who would easily spot their movement. But Jackson dismissed her concerns as overthinking. "Chun, you're always worried about perfect conditions," he said impatiently. "Sometimes you just have to accept risk and move forward. We're burning daylight with all this planning." Against her better judgment, Sarah followed the team into the open ground. Within minutes, they were spotted by enemy forces, and the entire mission was compromised. The team spent the next 4 hours evading capture in difficult terrain, ultimately failing to gather the required intelligence. During the after-action review, the cadre was brutal in their assessment. "This was a complete failure of leadership and planning," the evaluating sergeant announced. The team leader ignored sound tactical principles and dismissed valid concerns from team members. The result was mission failure and potential casualties. Jackson's confidence visibly deflated as he received the criticism. For the first time since training began, his natural charisma wasn't sufficient to overcome poor decision-making. Sarah felt sympathy for him, but also recognized an important lesson about the difference between confidence and competence. The second day brought a new mission with Rodriguez as the designated leader. His prior enlisted experience showed immediately as he conducted thorough planning sessions and assigned specific roles to each team member. Sarah found herself designated as the intelligence analyst, a position that played to her strengths while keeping her involved in the leadership process. Rodriguez's methodical approach proved much more successful. The team moved carefully through difficult terrain, gathered the required intelligence, and returned to base without being detected. Sarah's detailed analysis of enemy positions and movements earned praise from the evaluators, who noted her thorough understanding of tactical intelligence procedures. "Good work, Chun," Rodriguez said during their brief rest period. "Your briefing gave us exactly what we needed to plan the next phase. That's what good staff work looks like." The comment meant more to Sarah than Rodriguez probably realized. For the first time, she felt like she was contributing meaningfully to the team's success rather than just trying to keep up with everyone else's capabilities. The third and most challenging day began with Sarah being assigned as the team leader for their final mission. The task was complex: establish an observation post, gather intelligence on enemy movements, and coordinate with supporting units to plan a simulated attack. The mission would require 12 hours of continuous operations with minimal rest. Sarah's heart pounded as she received the briefing, but she forced herself to focus on the analytical approach that had always served her well. She studied the terrain maps carefully, identified multiple routes and contingency plans, and assigned roles based on each team member's strengths rather than trying to do everything herself. "Jackson, I need you to lead the movement team," she began during her planning session. "Your physical capabilities and confidence will be crucial for getting us to the objective safely. Rodriguez, I want you as my assistant team leader. Your experience will help me avoid tactical mistakes." For the first time, Sarah felt comfortable giving orders. Instead of trying to prove she could do everything as well as her teammates, she focused on coordinating their various strengths toward accomplishing the mission. The movement to the objective took 4 hours through difficult terrain, but Sarah's careful planning paid off. The team moved quietly and efficiently, avoiding enemy patrols and arriving at their designated position undetected. Jackson's leadership of the movement was excellent when guided by sound planning and clear objectives. Establishing the observation post required patience and attention to detail. Sarah positioned team members to provide overlapping fields of observation while maintaining security. She established communication procedures with supporting units and created detailed logs of all enemy activity. The most challenging moment came when enemy forces unexpectedly changed their patrol patterns, threatening to discover the team's position. Sarah had to make a quick decision: maintain the observation post and risk discovery, or move to a new position and potentially miss critical intelligence. Drawing on everything she had learned about leadership under pressure, Sarah made the call to relocate. "We moved to alternate position 2, she whispered into her radio. "Maintain communication discipline and follow my lead." The team moved smoothly to their backup position, a testament to Sarah's thorough planning and her team's growing confidence in her leadership. They continued gathering intelligence without compromising their mission or endangering team members. When the final phase required coordinating with artillery units to plan simulated fire missions, Sarah's analytical skills proved invaluable. She calculated precise grid coordinates, determined appropriate munitions, and communicated complex targeting information clearly and efficiently. The mission concluded after 14 hours with complete success. Sarah's team had gathered comprehensive intelligence, avoided detection, and provided supporting units with everything needed for follow-on operations. During the final debrief, the evaluators noted the stark contrast between this mission and the first day's failure. "This is what right looks like," Captain Williams announced to the assembled teams. Lieutenant Chin demonstrated that effective leadership comes from understanding your strengths, using your team's capabilities efficiently, and making sound decisions under pressure. This was textbook small unit leadership. As the exhausted officers loaded buses for the return trip, Sarah felt a profound sense of accomplishment. She hadn't become the strongest or fastest officer in her class, but she had proven that her analytical approach and attention to detail could be just as effective as natural charisma or physical prowess. More importantly, she had earned the genuine respect of her teammates. Jackson approached her during the bus ride back to base with a humility she hadn't seen before. "I owe you an apology," he said quietly. "I dismissed your concerns during that first mission because I thought being decisive meant not listening to other perspectives. Watching you lead made me realize that real confidence comes from making informed decisions, not just quick ones." The conversation continued as other team members shared their observations about leadership styles and lessons learned. Sarah realized that everyone had grown during the 3-day exercise, but perhaps none more than herself. The scared, uncertain officer who had arrived at training 2 months ago had evolved into someone capable of leading others through complex, high-pressure situations. The final weeks of training would bring new challenges, but Sarah now faced them with genuine confidence rather than desperate hope. She had found her place as a leader and discovered that her unique strengths could be just as valuable as anyone else's natural abilities. The success of the field exercise marked a turning point in Sarah's training, but the final month would test every officer in ways they hadn't anticipated. Captain Williams gathered the remaining 28 officers. 2 had already withdrawn from the program, in the classroom for an announcement that would challenge everything they thought they understood about leadership. "Your final evaluation will not be a simulation," he began with characteristic directness. "You will be working with real soldiers from the 82nd Airborne Division. These are experienced combat veterans who have served multiple deployments in Afghanistan and Iraq. They will evaluate your leadership potential based on your ability to earn their respect and accomplish real-world training missions." Sarah felt her newfound confidence waver slightly. Working with seasoned soldiers would be entirely different from leading fellow officers who were all learning together. These men and women had actual combat experience and would immediately recognize any weakness or uncertainty in their leadership. The first challenge came during initial meetings with their assigned squads. Sarah was introduced to 9 paratroopers ranging in age from 19 to 34, led by Staff Sergeant Williams, a soft-spoken veteran with 3 combat deployments. His calm demeanor somehow felt more intimidating than any drill sergeant's shouting. "Ma'am, these soldiers have been training together for 2 years," Staff Sergeant Williams explained during their private meeting. "They know their jobs better than you know yours right now. Your challenge will be earning their trust and adding value to what they already do well." Sarah studied the personnel files of her assigned soldiers. Specialist Martinez had joined the Army after losing his job during the economic recession and was now one of the unit's most reliable radio operators. Corporal Johnson was a former college student who excelled at tactical planning and had been recommended for sergeant promotion. Private First Class Thompson, no relation to her classmate, was barely 19 but had already proven himself during a deployment to Afghanistan. The contrast between these experienced soldiers and her own limited knowledge was stark. While Sarah had spent months learning theoretical concepts and classroom procedures, these men and women had applied similar skills in life-or-death situations overseas. Their first training exercise involved conducting a vehicle checkpoint operation, a routine task that required coordination between multiple agencies and careful attention to legal procedures. Sarah spent hours preparing detailed briefings and standard operating procedures, drawing on everything she had learned about military law and rules of engagement. However, when the exercise began, Sarah quickly realized that her thorough preparation meant little without the practical experience to adapt when situations changed. The checkpoint received unexpected visitors, including local media, civilian contractors, and even a simulated medical emergency that required immediate coordination with outside agencies. Staff Sergeant Williams stepped in smoothly to handle complications that Sarah hadn't anticipated, coordinating with multiple agencies while maintaining the checkpoint's security and efficiency. His experience showed in every decision, from positioning vehicles to managing crowd control to communicating with higher headquarters. "Ma'am, you had excellent standard operating procedures," he said during the after-action review. "Your preparation was thorough and legally sound. But leading soldiers requires more than perfect procedures. It requires the ability to make quick decisions when procedures don't cover the situation you're facing." Sarah felt frustrated by the feedback, but she also recognized its accuracy. Her analytical approach served her well in planning phases, but real-world leadership required adaptability that could only come through experience. The question was how to gain that experience without making costly mistakes with real soldiers under her command. The solution came from an unexpected source. During evening downtime, Sarah approached her soldiers not as their commanding officer, but as someone genuinely interested in learning from their experiences. She asked questions about their previous deployments, the challenges they had faced, and the leadership styles that had proven most effective in combat situations. "The best leaders I've served under were the ones who listened more than they talked," Corporal Johnson shared during one of these informal sessions. "They didn't pretend to know everything, but they made sure they understood the situation before making decisions that affected our safety." Private First Class Thompson, despite his young age, had insights that surprised Sarah. "Ma'am, most of us don't need someone to tell us how to do our jobs. We need someone who can coordinate between different groups and make sure we have what we need to accomplish the mission. Sometimes leadership is just removing obstacles so we can do what we're trained to do." These conversations proved more valuable than any classroom instruction Sarah had received. She began to understand that her analytical skills could complement rather than compete with her soldiers' practical experience. Instead of trying to prove she knew as much as they did, she focused on creating conditions for their success. The second major exercise tested this new approach. The mission involved establishing a forward operating base in hostile territory, requiring coordination between multiple units and careful attention to security procedures. Sarah spent considerable time in planning sessions, but this time she involved her squad leaders in the process rather than developing procedures in isolation. "Sergeant Williams, based on your deployment experience, what are the most common security vulnerabilities when establishing a new base?" she asked during planning sessions. "Corporal Johnson, what communication challenges should we anticipate with multiple units operating in the same area?" By incorporating their practical knowledge into her analytical framework, Sarah developed a comprehensive plan that addressed both theoretical requirements and real-world challenges. When unexpected complications arose during execution, she had knowledgeable subordinates positioned to handle problems quickly while she coordinated the overall response. The exercise proved successful, earning praise from evaluating officers who noted the seamless integration between Sarah's planning abilities and her squad's practical expertise. More importantly, She could see growing respect from her soldiers, who appreciated being included in decision-making processes rather than simply receiving orders. "Ma'am, that was solid leadership," Staff Sergeant Williams commented privately after the exercise. "You're learning to use everyone's strengths instead of trying to prove you're the smartest person in the room. That's what we need from our officers." The final challenge of the month came in the form of a complex scenario that combined everything Sarah had learned throughout her training. Her unit was tasked with conducting a humanitarian aid mission in a simulated disaster area, requiring coordination with civilian agencies, medical personnel, and multiple military units while maintaining security in an unstable environment. The mission parameters seemed designed to test every possible leadership skill simultaneously. Sarah would need to demonstrate tactical competence, administrative efficiency, emotional intelligence, and the ability to make difficult decisions under pressure. Unlike previous exercises, this scenario would continue for 5 continuous days with minimal rest and constantly changing requirements. Sarah approached the challenge systematically, applying lessons learned from both her classroom training and her recent experience working with experienced soldiers. She began by conducting detailed planning sessions that incorporated input from all available expertise, not just military personnel. The civilian agency representatives provided crucial insights about humanitarian operations that weren't covered in standard military doctrine. The difference between military operations and humanitarian missions is that success is measured by the number of people you help rather than the number of enemies you defeat, explained Rebecca Martinez, a Red Cross coordinator participating in the exercise. Your soldiers need to understand that their job is to create safe conditions for civilians to receive aid, not to control every aspect of the operation. This perspective helped Sarah frame the mission in terms that made sense to her combat-experienced soldiers while acknowledging the different requirements of humanitarian work. She structured her unit's operations to provide security and logistics support while allowing civilian agencies to lead actual aid distribution efforts. The 5-day exercise tested every aspect of Sarah's development as a leader. She had to make resource allocation decisions when supply deliveries were delayed, coordinate with frustrated civilian officials when security requirements conflicted with aid distribution needs, and maintain morale among exhausted soldiers working longer hours than normal. The most challenging moment came on day 3 when a simulated attack on the aid distribution center required immediate tactical response while protecting hundreds of civilian role players. Sarah had to balance force protection requirements with her unit's humanitarian mission, making split-second decisions that could affect both military and civilian casualties. Drawing on everything she had learned about leadership under pressure, Sarah coordinated her unit's response while maintaining communication with civilian agencies and higher military headquarters. Her analytical approach proved valuable in managing multiple competing priorities simultaneously, while her soldiers' experience ensured that tactical procedures were executed flawlessly. When the exercise concluded, Sarah felt genuinely proud of her unit's performance. They had successfully completed all assigned missions while maintaining the highest standards of both military professionalism and humanitarian concern. More importantly, she had led the entire operation without ever feeling like she was pretending to be someone she wasn't. The final evaluation from her assigned soldiers proved more meaningful than any grade from instructional cadre. "Ma'am, I'd be honored to serve under your command in a real deployment," Staff Sergeant Williams told her during their concluding interview. "You've developed into the kind of leader who makes everyone around you better at their jobs." As the final month of training drew to a close, Sarah reflected on the transformation she had undergone since arriving at Fort Bragg 4 months earlier. The scared, uncertain officer who had struggled with basic physical training had evolved into a confident leader capable of managing complex operations with experienced soldiers. The journey had been more difficult than anything she had ever attempted, but it had also revealed strengths she never knew she possessed. The final week of Officer Basic Course arrived with a mixture of anticipation and anxiety that permeated every corner of the barracks. 26 officers remained from the original 30 who had started the journey 4 months earlier. Each had been fundamentally changed by the experience, but none more so than Sarah Chun, who now stood before her mirror adjusting her dress uniform for the graduation ceremony. The reflection staring back at her bore little resemblance to the uncertain young woman who had stepped off the bus at Fort Bragg. Her posture was straighter, her eyes more confident, and her hands steady as she pinned on the various awards and ribbons she had earned throughout training. The physical changes were obvious. She had lost 15 pounds while gaining considerable muscle tone. But the mental transformation was even more profound. Captain Williams had requested individual meetings with each graduating officer to discuss their future assignments and provide final counseling. When Sarah entered his office, she found him reviewing a thick folder containing 4 months of evaluation reports, test scores, and peer assessments. "Lieutenant Chun, please have a seat." He began with the same serious expression he had maintained throughout their training. "I wanted to discuss your performance and your future in the Army." Sarah braced herself for whatever feedback was coming. Despite her recent successes, she still remembered the early weeks of struggle and failure that had nearly broken her confidence completely. "When you arrived here, I honestly wasn't sure you would make it through the first month," Captain Williams continued with characteristic bluntness. "Your initial physical performance was well below standard. You struggled with basic military tasks, and your leadership style was more suited to an academic environment than a combat unit." The words stung, even though Sarah knew they accurately described her early performance. She had documented her own struggles extensively in her personal journal, so hearing them summarized by her company commander wasn't entirely surprising. However, Captain Williams continued, "Your development over these 4 months has been remarkable. You've transformed from someone who couldn't complete basic obstacles to a competent officer capable of leading experienced soldiers through complex operations. More importantly, you've learned to leverage your analytical strengths without being paralyzed by the need for perfect information." He opened her file and began reviewing specific evaluation reports. "Your performance during the final humanitarian exercise was particularly impressive. The evaluating officers noted that you successfully integrated military and civilian operations while maintaining the respect and confidence of subordinate soldiers. That's advanced leadership that some officers never master." Sarah felt a surge of pride mixed with relief. The validation meant more coming from Captain Williams, who had observed her struggle and growth from the beginning, than it would have from any outside evaluator. "I've recommended you for assignment to the 101st Airborne Division at Fort Campbell," he announced. "It's a demanding assignment that will test everything you've learned here, but I believe you're ready for the challenge. You'll be leading a logistics platoon responsible for supporting combat operations, which plays to your analytical strengths while requiring the leadership skills you've developed." The assignment was both exciting and terrifying. Sarah had dreamed of serving with an elite unit like the 101st Airborne, but she also knew that the soldiers there would have high expectations for their officers. The thought of leading paratroopers who might deploy to combat zones within months felt like an enormous responsibility. After her meeting with Captain Williams, Sarah walked across the base to attend the final formation where assignments would be announced publicly. The other graduating officers gathered in small groups, sharing their news and discussing future plans. The bonds formed during their shared struggles had created friendships that would likely last throughout their military careers. Jackson approached her with a humility that would have seemed impossible 4 months earlier. His natural confidence remained, but it was now tempered by genuine respect for others and understanding of his own limitations. "Sarah, I wanted to thank you," he said quietly. "Watching you develop into a real leader taught me more about leadership than any classroom instruction. I was so focused on looking like a leader that I forgot about actually being one. Your example showed me the difference." Similar conversations occurred throughout the afternoon as officers reflected on their shared experience and the lessons they had learned from each other. Rodriguez shared that Sarah's analytical approach had helped him become more thorough in his planning. Lisa mentioned that Sarah's determination in overcoming physical challenges had inspired her to push through her own moments of doubt. The formal graduation ceremony took place that evening in the base auditorium. Family members had traveled from across the country to witness their children, spouses, and siblings complete one of the military's most challenging training programs. Sarah's parents sat in the front row, beaming with pride as they watched their daughter stand at attention with her fellow officers. Brigadier General Patricia Martinez, the commanding general of the training brigade, served as the guest speaker for the ceremony. Her remarks focused on the responsibilities that came with military leadership and the importance of continuing to grow and learn throughout their careers. The completion of this training is not the end of your development as leaders, she emphasized. It is the beginning of a lifelong commitment to serving others and protecting our nation's interests. The soldiers you will soon lead deserve officers who never stop learning, growing, and improving their ability to make sound decisions under pressure. When Sarah's name was called to receive her certificate of completion, she walked across the stage with confidence she had earned through months of struggle and growth. The applause from her fellow officers meant as much as the recognition from the platform party, representing acknowledgement from people who had witnessed her entire journey. After the ceremony, Sarah's family joined her for a private celebration dinner at a nearby restaurant. Her parents peppered her with questions about her training experience and future assignment, clearly amazed by the transformation they observed in their daughter. "You seem so different," her mother observed. "More confident, but also more serious about your responsibilities. I can see why the military thinks you're ready to lead soldiers." Her father, a civilian engineer who had worried about his daughter's decision to join the military, now expressed genuine pride in her accomplishments. "I'll admit I had doubts when you first announced you wanted to be an officer," he said. "But seeing what you've become and hearing about your assignment to the 101st Airborne, I couldn't be more proud of your dedication and growth." That night, Sarah sat alone in her barracks room for the final time, packing her belongings and reflecting on the journey that had brought her to this point. The scared, uncertain young woman who had arrived at Fort Bragg felt like a different person entirely. The challenges that had once seemed impossible were now just difficult tasks that required proper planning and determined execution. Her personal journal from the past 4 months told the story of transformation in her own words. Early entries documented fear, self-doubt, and consideration of quitting. Recent entries reflected confidence, clear thinking about leadership challenges, and excitement about future opportunities to serve and lead soldiers. The most important lesson Sarah had learned wasn't about military tactics or physical fitness, though she had certainly improved in both areas. The crucial insight was that leadership came in many different forms, and her analytical, methodical approach could be just as effective as natural charisma or physical prowess when applied correctly. She had also learned that real strength came not from never struggling, but from persevering through difficulties while continuing to learn and adapt. Every moment of doubt, every failed exercise, and every embarrassing mistake had contributed to her development as a leader capable of handling complex challenges with confidence and competence. As Sarah prepared for sleep on her final night at Fort Bragg, she thought about the soldiers she would soon be leading at Fort Campbell. They would be experienced paratroopers with high expectations for their officers, but she now felt genuinely prepared to meet those expectations. The 4 months of intensive training had given her the tools, knowledge, and confidence necessary to serve effectively as a military leader. The journey from uncertain college graduate to confident Army officer was complete, but Sarah understood that her real education in leadership was just beginning. The 101st Airborne Division would present new challenges that would require continued growth and adaptation. However, the foundation established during Officer Basic Course had prepared her not just for the immediate challenges ahead, but for a lifetime of service and leadership. When the alarms sounded for the final time at 0500 hours the next morning, Second Lieutenant Sarah Chun rose with the same determination that had carried her through the most difficult 4 months of her life. She was ready to begin the next chapter of her military career, confident in her abilities and eager to serve the soldiers who would soon depend on her leadership. The transformation was complete, but the mission was just beginning.